Hello, welcome to this new game review. We'll have a look at a game in which black broke a lot of opening principles, which remained unpunished, and later white got a bad endgame, which it seems he had morally given up on long before the game was actually lost. So let's take a look. So it started as some kind of King's Indian type thing. Bishop f5, this is a variation, this is quite rare. The idea is to not allow e4, but this of course isn't very natural. So white develops normally. Black plays knight d7. Usually they play g6 or something like queen c8, though that's probably better after g3. But okay, knight d7, g3, and c5. So now black is offering some kind of Benoni, which might be fine for black, as he has this bishop developed. He can exchange some pieces, but white correctly declines. Queen c8, this is a very strange move. This kind of threatens to take at some point, but not really. Even the c4 pawn is not the most important thing right now. So white castles, and black plays knight b6. So he has made enough inaccuracies to get a lost position. And at this point, we have to understand opening principles, and one of them is that whenever the opponent is undeveloped and we have a big development advantage, and especially when the opponent's king is in the center, we have to open up the center towards this king and try to attack it and use the fact that we have more pieces in the attack. At this point, black has moved the queen already. He has moved this knight twice. He has not castled the king. He is very far away from castling, as the bishop is not developed. So here white is winning after the simple capture in c5. For example, after queen c5, bishop e3, there's a lot of initiative here. The queen has to move away right now. White has developed all of his pieces. He has used all of his pieces only once. And after some easy moves like knight b5, rook c1, c5, knight d4, white's attack is just going through naturally, and the game is basically over. More natural is probably to take like this, but even here a4 is one of the ideas, but the idea of bishop f4 and knight b5 should be quite enough to win the game, or at least put enormous pressure on black's position. So the principle holds. If the opponent is doing some kind of nonsense, we develop our pieces, we open up the position and hopefully kill him because we have more pieces in the game. Set d5 is played, which gives a much smaller advantage. Now white's advantage is only positional. Of course he has more space, he has better pieces, and this knight is bad, but the advantage is not enough to win yet, because now we just have some kind of Benoni. Now black gets to develop as the position is closed. e4, bishop g4, queen d3. White gets the bishop pair, which is fine, but in this closed position it's not that important. Knight e5, queen c2, and queen h3. So this kind of attacks white. White plays f4, which is a nice counterattack. Knight g4, giving up the bishop pair, playing queen king g2, and we arrive at this position in which white has a lot more space. This knight on b6 is still bad. Notice it can never take on c4 because of this check for now, and the black is still not really developed fully, so white should be a little bit better, but again the advantage is not really huge yet. So black plays h5, which is a bit optimistic. h3, taking away the queen, and then b3, defending the c4 pawn and also preparing bishop b2 to finish development. And of course white's main break here is to play e5. We can also consider f5, but the rook has moved away from f1, so probably e5 makes more sense. And after castling, now white can just play bishop b2, play rook a d1, slowly prepare e5, and it's not really clear what black is trying to do. One of his ideas is e6, the other is b5, so b5 is out of question. There's not really much else for black to do. He should try to play a e6, for example, like this. And white can just allow, usually, e6, and attack this square on d6 with the knight, with the e-pawn, exchange bishops, and white should be doing very well here. Instead, white goes for e5, but this is completely inadequate. White is still not developed. He has hanging pieces like the knight on c3. His king is a bit more open than black's. This rook on a1 is not developed. This is not very principled. And now black takes over a little bit with e6, principally opening up the position even more. And now white starts to go wrong. He goes bishop a3, and this gives up a pawn, cd, de, though here probably rook e8 was a bit better, but this is also fine for black. And here after rook f8, white has these nice pawns in the center, but the problem was exactly that he has not developed his pieces yet, so whatever he has in the center will not really matter, because he is not in time to defend it. And his pieces are uncoordinated, his king is weak, and this bishop on a3, for example, is completely out of play. It doesn't matter that it will take the pawn on c5. The bishop belongs on this diagonal to fight against this bishop. So now white plays e6, which is the correct solution. Now some pawns are exchanged. Black is a pawn ahead for now, but white takes here. Queen c6. Now we get an endgame. White basically has to take. And now he has to take again because there's a lot of pressure in this diagonal. Black takes back and rook c1. So we have arrived at this endgame. And the structure is a little bit better for white as he has less pawn islands. His king is now not exactly weak, but it is maybe even a bit more active. So white should be fine positionally, but now after d4 it is black who has the initiative. He is threatening to put the rook on e2, and white is under some trouble. He should be able to hold rather easily by exchanging pieces, as for example a rook endgame would be quite drawn here, as there's not many pawns here and the king is quite active and the rook is looking at c6. So knight e4 should naturally come to mind, exchanging pieces. For example, knight takes, black takes back. The rook can arrive here. It can even take on a2. But for example, after bishop a7, rook a4, and for example bishop b6, there's no one defending this pawn. This one is not really queening yet. The pawn on h5 is a weakness, for example like this. So the position should be quite drawn as everything is likely to get exchanged. But here white plays bishop b6, which is a big mistake. It's not clear what the point of giving up the bishop was. Instead, white should just, as mentioned, play here, or even simpler, just knight d1. This of course allows the rook infiltration, but now white's pieces are quite active and now he can take. Taking on c6, the knight can go to d3 eventually to blockade the pawn. And it's not clear why white should be any worse here, with equal material, at least for now. But bishop b6, it's not clear what white had planned after the simple recapture. Now black's structure has been straightened out. He has the bishop, which is better than the knight in such endgames. And after, for example, knight e4, the rook is also more active. King f3, rook e3 for example, and the b5. White is under tremendous pressure. He should still hold, but the position is not that fun. But black instead takes here, and now we understand that white's bishop is attacked, and we should either move it or take on a7, and the answer is usually to exchange pawns in such endgames. So it's not clear why white didn't just take on a7. Either way, the rook is coming to e2, so there's not much you can do about this. But instead, white just decided to play a pawn down. But there was no reason for this, just take here, and the same position may happen. For example, here. Of course, black does have the passed pawn. He might pick up the pawn on b3 to be a pawn ahead, but this passed pawn is still blockaded. It's not clear how black will promote it. This king is extremely active. It can either go here or go g4, or most likely just go towards the pawn. And the position is quite drawn. So white plays here, but now black is a pawn ahead for not much. But still white should be able to draw by exchanging pawns and getting some counterplay. White plays king e4, but this doesn't really go anywhere. White should have played g4. This is probably the best idea, exchanging some pawns. And when black is left with these isolated pawns on the queen side, the king can come over, and probably everything will be exchanged, especially if the bishops get off the board with bishop d4 at some point. White shouldn't really have any problems. But king e4 was played, and here black could win by the nice move rook d2, with the idea of not allowing bishop d4. which would exchange into a drawn rook endgame. But rook g4, g2 happens, and here white could consider this, but now it is not the right moment because the pawn on c3 is defended, so white should do something else. He plays bishop d6, and probably the king should go back. But okay, bishop d6, king f7, and here it's written the rest is a matter of technique, and white resigned shortly after, but the position is not resignable at all. Black is only a pawn ahead and his pawn is doubled. All white needs to do is get active. For example, if he puts his rook on c6, he will be fine completely, or on c4 for example. Firstly, we should of course move away the bishop, and it's not clear how black is trying to win here. For example, if c2, this doesn't really threaten much, because if bishop b2 we'll just move the rook, but here we can just pick up the pawn actually, and it's not clear what black is trying to do here. Otherwise, I don't really see a plan for black, and his pawns are weak. For example, rook f2, we can maybe play h4, but probably king e3 is simpler, and it's not clear how black is going to make progress here. If white gets any time to activate his rook, he will be completely fine, and white is always threatening to go here and, for example, exchange bishops, but most likely the rook is the priority. So such endgames should be tried to be defended. We shouldn't really resign ourselves that we have lost, even though the game is still going.